Well, hello, and welcome to Bio 211, Anatomy and Physiology 1. We're looking at practical number 3. And in practical number 3, remember we're looking at bones. Not just the bones themselves, but what type of bones are they? Are they flat? Are they irregular? Are they long? The construction of bones. What are the outer layers? Periosteum. What are the inner layers? Endosteum. Remember, there are two parts to the skeletal system. We have axial, AX, and we have appendicular, AP. Okay, and you should be able to identify all of the bones in the human body that are part of this. Remembering as well, we paid special attention to the construction of the human skull. Beyond that, we wanted to think about the articulations of bones, right? So let's get rid of that. Wham. Do this. We go articulations, ART, art. Articulations, art for articulations. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure you understood that there were different types of joints, where what we did is, if we looked at the skull again, we saw that we actually have joints that fuse together. If we look at the hips, we looked at joints that fuse together there. You should be able to identify what those are and what type of joint would take bones and bring them together and literally allow for the fusion to create one solid structure. Thinking about that, thinking about in a youth how it is that your sacrum is 5 individual bones, but as an adult, your sacrum is one fused bone itself. Right? So what does that mean in terms of articulations between each of the vertebrae? What type of cartilage would you use for that? Okay? Cartilages, because there are different types, right? There's hyaline, there's fibro, and there is elastic. And do we see elastic cartilage in the skeleton anywhere, being used inside the skeleton for articulations? Because that's really what we're thinking about. Remember, we spent most of our time thinking about synovial types of articulations, and synovial, okay, and synovial articulations are those that have different ranges of motion. So you should be able to identify each of the different types of synovial joints that are found inside the body. Finally, let's get rid of all of that. Finally, what we also want to know is we want to be able to see or say that we have an understanding of, 25 muscular structures, MUSC, muscular structures on the body. And remember, we started with what is the basic construction, CONST, construction of musculature. Remember, I brought out cardiac, smooth, and skeletal muscle fibers for you to be able to identify them throughout the body. Remember, most of AMP2, when you get to AMP2, most of AMP2 is how does cardiac muscle structures work and how do smooth muscle structures work. So even though in AMP1 we spend most of our time thinking about skeletal muscle tissue, how we activate it using neuromuscular junctions, understanding that you see a lower motor neuron, you're actually creating a neuromuscular junction. Okay? When we're doing all of that, what we want to make sure you understand is that we have like a list of 25 or so muscles and muscle groups. I'll give you some examples of these as we go through. Okay? And at the end of the day, remember, I'm not going to ask you, there'll be some subset of questions like, identify this muscle. It's going to be, what is the origin of this muscle? What is the insertion of this muscle? What is the action of this muscle? Okay? Remembering that contraction of musculature is the shortest distance between 2 points, where A is pulling on B and B is pulling on A. And if you can remember that while you're in the middle of the practical, think through what the action would be. Remember that little cheesy little table that looks absolutely nothing like what you see inside your textbook, okay, in terms of what actions are. That is sort of like the basic understanding of what an action is. Okay, cool. Well, let's go through. I think I found a practical from, 2016 or something like that. And I'd like you to see how I've approached asking these questions in the past. Well, this isn't working out the way I thought it was going to work out, so I have to hit pause and do some editing here. Okay, cool. Take a look. In this, what you can see is the first question is identify the cartilage type. But before we identify that this is fibrocartilage, and it's not all that hard to do, I want you to see what I've used here, of course, is the axial and appendicular skeleton construction of a spinal column, right? So when you're walking inside the room, it's like, okay, I remember that there are two major types of cartilage I need to see inside the human body. How's he going to ask me about this? So when you're approaching the station, okay, what is the needle pointing at? What is the actual end of the needle pointing at here? And that's how you'll go about answering your question. Okay. In another example here, what you can see is questions 6 through 8. So on your answer sheet, you're going to block off questions 6 through 8, and you're going to identify the name of the bone inside the box. Okay, this cartoon, this thing is the blue of the boxes. Remember, I said there's going to be between 4 and 6 of them on a practical. You should prepare for like 6. What is the name of the bone? What is the type of the bone? What does that mean? It means is it a long bone, a short bone, a flat bone, etc. And whether it's part of the axial or appendicular skeleton. In the past, this is new. I mean, in the past I would never even say, what part of the skeleton is it? People would forget there's an axial and an appendicular skeleton, right? So here's axial, right? And appendicular. Everything else is attached to it. Boom, 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 boom. Yes, no, maybe. Get the general idea? Okay, so axial along the axis of the body, appendicular, attached to what is adjacent or around it. So, switching over to musculature here, right? What we want to do is take a look at that. What you can see here is I've pulled out one of the models, labeled 18 through 20 here, so you can see that the end of the needle is pointing at something specific. I'm pointing at the thin filament here, I'm pointing at the thick filament there, and I'm pointing at the mitochondria here. But this is also a good opportunity for us to recognize that I'm not pointing at the T-tubule here, or the triad that's formed as a result of two sarcoplasmic reticulum attached to that T-tubule, or these little purple pinkish dots here, which are, in fact, glycogen stored inside of that tissue. So each of these models, if this is less dense than the one you can see up here, this would mean this is cardiac muscle tissue as opposed to skeletal muscle tissue upside here. Now, we have several models that we've looked at, right? If you think about this model, if you think about, say, neuromuscular junction, you don't see a neuromuscular junction on this, but remember, I've showed you models that actually have neuromuscular junctions on them. Okay. Well, what we've done here, so moving away from the models in that sense, and taking a look at this bone here. This bone looks like it is a left part of a pelvic structure, right, where we have the ischium, the ilium, and the pubis, and they're all fused together, and it's going to articulate with what? Okay? What bones articulate with this bone? And in fact, in all correctness, I should have put bones, because if I'm going to draw this out for you, right, remember that over here on the opposite face here, we actually have the acetabulum, so this would be our femur, right? You would also have, on this structure, you would also have the opposite side of this bone, which would then be the pubic bone that articulates here, correct? To create the other side. And then, of course, most students are going to forget that this articulates with sacrum. Okay, so think of femur, think it's going to articulate with another pubic bone. Okay, and think that the articulation with the sacrum is what allows the pelvic structure to actually work. Questions I've asked in the past that are similar to this is, one, how many bones articulate with the sacrum? That would be one way to think about it, right? So it would be the sacrum is on one side, right? It's also on the other. So there are 3 bones that are on this side, meaning ischium, ilium, and pubis, and 3 bones, ischium, ilium, and pubis on the other. So the answer I'm looking for here would be 6 bones that articulate with it. Okay. Yeah, notice I'm intentionally not showing the opposite side of the bone here. But when you get to the station, pick up the bone, look at it, make sure you understand what it is you're looking at, and don't be fooled by the fact that the acetabulum is fusion of 3 bones. Okay? Sort of similar to what I was just asking you about. What you can see here is I could bring you to a station. I could give you an entire structure where you can see 2 distal ends of the femurs here, and I could say, what type of bone is this? And leave it as simple as that, right? But I could also say, what are the numbers of bones that articulate with this bone? Okay? Or, what else could I do? I could say, identify all of the bones that articulate with this one bone. Okay? These are things that I've actually asked in the past, right? So, again, you walk up to the station, you make sure you understand what the question is asking you, you identify that this is a patella. The patella is what type of bone? Sesamoidal bone. It is going to articulate with the distal end of the femur. It will also articulate with the proximal end of a tibia, right? Okay, cool. So switching over to muscles, I apologize. This picture isn't the most focused. I apologize for that. We sort of similar to all the bones inside the body, we expect that you've learned the names of all of the muscles on those lists of structures for muscles. And on this structure here, you can see if you approach a station like this, notice what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, what is this muscle? And notice what I'm doing is I'm saying, does the student recognize that this is the right leg of the model? And if it's the right leg of the model, and this is our sartorius, what muscle would this be? Okay? And that's the way you want to approach these questions. Likewise, I could easily have taken this needle over here and put it over on this part of the model here. Sorry, I have a different view than you guys do. But you could see how I could do that quite easily. Or I could move it down here. These are all muscles that are on our list. So make sure you're asking and you're telling me the right side or left side of the model. Okay? And making sure you pay attention to sort of the more obscure muscles on the body, right? So even though you can barely see it here, you can see that this is going to be the rectus abdominis, right? On this really large model. But also make sure you look for all of the tags, okay? So this would be our serratus anterior, right? Remember the serrated edges that travel around the end. If I took this and I put it here, it'd be the external intercostals, right? Okay? So again, just sort of, you can, if I'm you, I've drawn a quick skeleton. I've put some different layers of musculature on it, and you pay attention to those 25 muscles that are on there, okay? Including those erector spinae group names. So we did ask that you learn muscle origin and insertion, muscle origin, insertion, and action. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how I've tested for this in the past. And you need to pay attention to what I'm doing here, right? So notice this is a model we've used in the past for our nervous system structures. But remember, it doesn't matter what model I use. You should be able to pause for a moment and go, oh, I know that this is the mastoid process of the bone, so sternocleidomastoid, and we're going to see that it's traveling down here, okay, that musculature, and that would mean if that's the muscle, I need to know what the origin is, and I need to know what the insertion is. So remembering the names of the muscles give you a pretty good idea. In some instances, to be able to answer all these questions, make sure you take a look at the name closely. Again, here's another example of identify the muscle, the origin, and the insertion. Notice here is a model we haven't seen since the beginning of the semester, but you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of the fact that if you know that there are cavity separations inside of the body, and you know that there's a muscle that's responsible for that cavity separation, you should be able to identify it. Now, this is a tricky one, right? Because the insertion we actually ask you guys to learn, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But you should be able to write on the paper what the insertion would be if you know that this is the diaphragm. Okay? So just a couple more examples here, and then I'm going to put this up on Blackboard, and hopefully you're going to find it helpful. So in this example, there's a couple things, right? You're going to walk up to the station. See, it's question number 38. So we're getting close to the end. So these will be slightly more difficult, maybe. Who knows? And and you're going to see that there are some muscles that are missing, so it's hard to orient yourself. But you can see that if you can figure out if it's a right leg or a left leg, and I'm pointing to a specific group, notice it's still pretty much the same basic question. What is the muscle? What is the origin? And what is the insertion? All right. There will be questions about action. In fact, the way I tend to ask them is I will literally write, what is the action of this muscle? And I'm just going to point to a muscle on the body. Okay. And you can dope it out in the middle of the practical, but remember, try to remember that, there's a subset of these that we really want you to pay attention to. Okay. So finally, this is the one more example I'll give you. I've asked you guys to be able to draw the human knee. Make sure you can put the LCL, MCL, ACL, PCL, and the meniscuses. I didn't spell that right, sorry. Okay, as well as the meniscus. This is the way I put it, right? And identify all the bones correctly. Okay, so I'm asking something specific here, right? So let's imagine you draw something like this, you draw something like that, you draw something like that. And that means this is coming outside here. We're going to put the patella there. We'll put something outside here. We have something going behind, something going behind. So I'm asking you to tell me where the posterior cruciate ligament is. Can you see the posterior cruciate ligament here? No. So what you have to do is you also have to draw the posterior aspect, right? So if this is the left leg, where the fibula is actually on the lateral side, we have to draw that over there. We have to draw that over here. And now put in your meniscus, and now you can put in your posterior cruciate ligament, right? With me to get why this problem is not so straightforward. Yes, no, maybe. Okay. So this would be, and you'd have to tell me who's anterior because it has to make sense, right? And you'd have to tell me who's posterior. Because you can't just put, oh, that's the PCL. Well, it may be the PCL. I can't see it through the actual, what do you call it here? Patella. Okay? So do you understand the type of question? Okay. I hope you found all of this helpful. Again, it's practical. It's probably 20-something stations. It'll have 40-something questions on it. And remember, it's the beginning identifying sheets that will help you identify what I'm going to test you on. Literally, I will sit at the computer tomorrow morning. I will type out questions very similar to the ones you've seen right here. Okay, and you're going to walk around the room in an ascending serpentine manner. So if you start at number 24, your next number is number 25. You start at 1. If it's a group of them, it may be number 4, sort of thing. Make sure you pay attention to how you're doing that. Okay, have a wonderful day. And again, I hope you find this helpful. Take care now. Bye.